Hello, everyone, and welcome to this interview or discussion, I should say, with Dr. Tony Fuller. Thanks for joining us. It's a real pleasure to pull together a series of interviews with former and retired faculty from the Rural Planning and Development Program at the University of Guelph. And as mentioned today, we have with us Dr. Tony Fuller. Tony, how are you doing?
I'm fine, thank you. I'm looking forward to this discussion.
Indeed. Well, I have to say that my own experience in my undergraduate and graduate degrees is I was reading and working with your materials before I was ever affiliated myself with the University of Guelph. And again, you've had a meaningful impact for many people in terms of research and so on. But today we want to talk specifically about some of your recollections of the rural planning and development program at Guelph and going back in time as well. So maybe to start with, if you wouldn't just mind telling us a little bit about your background before you came to Guelph and your early days at Guelph.
Okay, well, I'm from the UK, from the University of Hull. I did my doctorate in fieldwork in Italy. I was in Italy for 3 years. And in preparation for Britain entering the common market, as it was called those days. But then I had the opportunity to come to Canada for 2 years, tax-free, and I did come. And then it was such a good place, and the academic environment was so positive that I wanted to stay and was able to do so at that time in the geography department.
Okay. What year would that have been, Tony? Just out of curiosity.
It was, in 1969, the year of the moon landing.
Okay.
So I didn't feel I was landing on the moon, although I was impressed with all the pictures of Sudbury being a test site for the moon. So with Phil Keddy from the geography department, we made a journey up to the Sudbury area to take a look at the moonscape.
Isn't that fascinating?
In my first year here in Canada.
Huh. So you came to Canada in 1969 and initially right at the University of Guelph and in geography, as you mentioned.
Yes. Yeah. So I was recruited by Fred Darms.
Okay.
So I came over for the 2-year deal, but I had to pay the taxes after 2 years in order to stay.
Boy,
so it shows
how much things have changed, for sure.
Yeah, it shows how dedicated I became.
Well, one of the things that gets me thinking about is all of the background work that occurred before, at that time, the University School of Rural Planning and Development was created. And there was lots of work across the university, wasn't there, in geography and elsewhere that led to the creation of the school. So any comments in that time period, Tony?
No, I think we were very lucky in some ways. We're the only academic institution in Canada to get a Kellogg Foundation grant at that time, and largely because of Nora Sabataroff in sociology anthropology, who had been at Penn State to do her doctoral work. And had been in the same group as Gary King, the program leader from Kellogg. So she did a very good job in promoting Guelph as a potential recipient of the Kellogg funds to reconnect the university with rural communities, as opposed to being ivory tower images and so forth. It was in an era when the ivory tower was used frequently as a way to criticize the isolation and esoteric nature of the universities.
That Kellogg Foundation grant was major, wasn't it, Tony? And was it 10
years?
It was
10 years? $2 million, which in 1970, in the mid to late 1970s was probably worth at least $4 million
Indeed.
today,
Indeed, yeah.
given the way things have increased and inflated. So it was a major grant, and and it arose out of collaboration. There was a Kellogg team with people from agriculture, economics, extension, geography, sociology, political science, and so on. So, it was a big group,
Hmm.
and we put together an application based on a multidisciplinary approach.
Hmm. Some of the names I've heard in the past, and there may be others, but did Doug Hoffman, did he play a role back then? And Norm Richards or some of the other names I remember? Maybe you would be.
Yeah, Doug was helpful, but yeah, and when we got the money, Doug moved over to Waterloo,
Mhm.
but Rick Richards was very prominent he was the dean of OAC, very positive about the outreach program, despite all the criticisms that the agriculture establishment were concerned about. But Rick Richards was a solid supporter, and he was very much involved. I'm sure Mark Lapping will
Mm.
remember this. He was very much involved in establishing the school of rural planning and development after the Kellogg program came to an end.
So when you joined the school, what year was that approximately? Because of course your career had you in geography for many years, and then you made the transfer over to the planning school, correct?
No, well, yeah, I always had some of my time in geography, but I became the director of the Kellogg program.
Okay.
So I had to be released from geography on the assumption that I would go back to geography once the program was concluded. But like a couple of other people from the Rural Development Outreach Program, the RDOP, we gravitated into the school. We
Yeah.
became part of the new school of rural planning and development.
So what are some of your memories of the early days of the new school, as you referred to it?
Yeah. Well, what I'd like to do is point out that some of the principles that the school was and still is based upon some of them came out of the outreach program.
Mm.
And outreach itself would be one of them, that we should be collaborating in our research and in our student training, student development, with rural communities, and not telling them what to do or and so forth. So we really established the fact that we should be listening as opposed to telling. But that was difficult for many faculty to do. We found a few that were willing to try that, and it was really quite a different way of approaching things. And the extension people were very offended because they were quite used to developing good new technologies at the university, and then extending those new knowledge to rural, in particular the farm community. And that worked pretty well. But with the Kellogg trying to shift that across North America, because we were part of 8 universities selected to try to make the university more responsive and more connected to rural. So the school's applied focus arose out of the experience that we had with doing outreach and turning it into a knowledge base. The other principles which were important I think, and still important, is that undergraduates couldn't spend enough time in a rural community to make any difference. So the school was established as a master's level education program, and because master's students needed to do, generally speaking, a thesis, a research thesis, and this would be based from working with community groups or in communities, or something that would affect the rural environment in one way or another, physically or socially. And so that master's principle came out of the RDOP as well.
Mm-hmm.
And we also, and then little bits and pieces like we established that in order to get students to go into rural communities and be frequent visitors to do their work, we needed to expedite travel. So we spent some of the Kellogg money on a car originally. And this is one of the awkward moments for me as director, because in the small print in the contract with Kellogg, we weren't supposed to spend money on things like an LTD, which became a big joke.
I'm sure the statutes of limitations is long gone now, so you're probably good. I do remember that van, and I'm sure many of our former students will as well. There was the van with rural development outreach or rural planning and development on the side of it. I recall that. And that would be in the 90s. So
RDOP van, and then it became a school van.
Yeah.
And got repainted. And we got rid of the LTD because it was creating such. I couldn't go anywhere without people saying, "Oh, you're the guy who bought the LTD." With anyway, there we are. But the idea that you got to do everything you can to make it possible for graduate students to have the opportunity of meeting and working with and listening to rural people. So those are some of the principles. I think Mark Lapping would be able to build on some of that. The school is applied, and that came out of, let's do it rather than talk about it. It was based also on cross appointments. So we try to keep up the idea that all those people who contributed to the idea of RDOP, that should turn itself into a school which was multidisciplinary, and the notion of cross appointments was established and didn't work very well, unfortunately. Again, I'm sure Mark and others will comment on this. Harry, for example, who tried, I think, very well to keep contact with agricultural economics and the school at the same time. Very, very difficult. So those are some of the ways in which the school character, if you like, and principles were transferred through a sort of a process of evaluating the RDOP to say, well, what really has worked? If we're going to do this as a university, then these are some of the principles which we are confident will work.
It's interesting. I often reflect on the culture of an organization, right? What is it that makes an organization a certain way? And it's insightful for me to hear those comments, because the things you mentioned, the collaboration, the applied nature, I think are still so foundational to what we do in the school and the program. And obviously way back to those early days in terms of setting in place that culture, if you like, for rural planning development at Guelph.
Yeah. Well, the outreach program tried very hard with Jackie Wolf, for for example, who can also speak to this, we did have several contacts with Aboriginal communities in Northern Ontario. We had a meeting at Guelph where Aboriginal people came down, and we had a very successful seminar series on sustainable development later, in which an Aboriginal leader, Tom Alcoes from the Burwash Native Peoples community in Sudbury, came down to speak to a full house at the Arboretum. So these were early probes to see what could be done between the university and Northern University. And what we learned was that really we should be encouraging the Northern universities to do the outreach, that it was virtually impossible to sustain an outreach connection from Guelph all the way into remote parts of the north, when Lakehead and Laurentian, and with Rick Richards at Algoma, trying to keep Algoma College going, we felt that we should work through that's what we learned, is that we should work through the Northern universities as opposed to having a direct link. So that was another attempt. It was early. It didn't have any major outcomes, but several students were involved. Most of the time it's about students.
Yes.
And it still is, right? Getting students into places where they can contribute through their research or through their study to the welfare and well-being of rural groups, rural committees, or rural communities themselves. So that was another little link over. And today, I mean, that's grown tremendously in the school and across the campus, and the links with Aboriginal culture, generally speaking, is really very, very amazing. It's grown so well when it was very difficult during my early remembrance.
In some ways that ties into maybe another question, but we've rural planning and development, and it's gone by different names. It was a university school at one point in time. Now it's a program, part of the School of Environmental Design and Rural Development. But if you reflect back over 40 years, Tony, what do you think rural planning and development has meant from your perspective to people and to places, I suppose?
Well, I think it's been a noble effort, noble. It's taken tremendous amount of work, experimental work, high risk work, unrewarded work. I think the faculty associated with the school over the years have had a tough time at the academic evaluations, because doing applied work, which doesn't lead to multiple publications, that is until you came along, Wayne. You were very good at getting stuff out, but earlier faculty found that very difficult, and became a problem in some ways. So I feel that's one, the fact that we could have a domestic program, domestic in the sense of rural planning, and produce a consistent stream of well-acknowledged rural planners who are now all over the province, all over Canada, is tremendous. I can't believe how many people I keep bumping into who are from the school, and on the rural planning side in particular, which you yourself again, Wayne, and George, before you really shaped, and Stephen Rod, I remember, always reminding us that we should be, our bread and butter was in the rural planning side. And on the rural development side, which was very, uneven, challenging, changing constantly, had strong political undercurrents going for it. Then the rural development was up and down according to who managed to acquire some funds or a project opportunity in which students could be reliably introduced to do their work, going to Africa or to various parts of the world. And again, given that I'm sort of on the international side, I run into them all over the place, or they've contacted me at least from a dozen or more different locations across the world, including Japan. Just talking to Tanaka not too long ago, and Smith, Erin Smith, who's in the Pacific arena, and so on and so forth. So people found themselves into all sorts of niches and nooks, and they're doing well. I mean, they've been doing very well, and they pop up and are proud of the school, and they remember all the school people that on the international side as well. And much credit to Farouk, who developed a strong basic rural development curriculum, which was a foundation for most of these people having a solid background before going abroad. And those things are all obviously supported by, the ISERPs, the International Rural Policy Group, that also encouraged students to go to different universities in different locations. And SURF sent students to different meetings in different places and so forth. And the Wageningen Guelph program that sent our students to the Netherlands and received students from the Netherlands and so on. So on the international side, so I'm very amazed that a small group of faculty, sometimes a bit despised by the rest of the university, at least that we had quite a battle on occasion to keep ourselves afloat, that we could manage two major programs, the rural planning and the rural development, for so many years with such success. Really, I can't remember any. In the dropout column, I don't think there are very many numbers there.
Well, as you know, Tony, I'm a bit of an optimist in life, and my sense is now the program truly is appreciated by the college and at the university level as well. But it's a testament to the hard work that the early faculty put in to help establish it. I also just wanted to do a bit of a call out. You mentioned Stephen Rod and Farouk Afshar, who are no longer with us, and it's just to acknowledge the important contributions that they made over the years, as I know you've already alluded to them as well. So
that's right. Yeah, and we should add to that to Nonita.
Yes, indeed.
Because without Nonita, we wouldn't be able to get the. It's a little bit like Nora Sabatarov earlier. Nonita is well connected to international agencies, so that when we applied for funding to support the International Rural Policy Program, with Missouri and with Aberdeen in Scotland as a triangular exchange program. Nonita's work was invaluable. So I would want her to be remembered as one of the stalwarts of putting these institutional things together. This sort of institutional building that the school has engaged in one way or another over the years, which has been very laudatory, and I'm sure our fellow colleagues will speak to that. I hope. in
Yeah,
the,
certainly remembering Anita Yap from her leadership, her mentorship, and her friendship as well for all of us, and to
yeah,
acknowledge those contributions too.
yeah.
What would you think are some of the challenges for rural planning development over the next 40 years, and maybe connected to that, what would you say to incoming students as well as we look to the future?
Well, yeah.
Hard question.
We've had major challenges, obviously. I think uh, this is me. You probably speak to this yourself better than I can, but the sort of uh, problems that arose here occasionally, not all the time, but were always in the background between were we really an agricultural support
Mm,
unit, because the university, really has a strong agricultural identity. So each generation of deans of OAC never quite knew what to do with us
mm,
um, until you came along, and you had a very clear manner in establishing who we were and how we should contribute well to the OAC agendas of one sort or another. But before that, there were lots of doubting Thomases and people who didn't really have much time for some of the things that we got engaged in. So I had a rough time, for example, because most of my students for one period were all engaged with farm women's networks,
mm,
and that wasn't that was considered to be peripheral or
mm.
esoteric or not necessary, and was given very short shrift around some of those issues, even though the farm women themselves did a lot better than many of the farm men during the 1982 credit crisis and so forth, and all the fallout from that period when people were farm families were very distressed and so forth. So this was came up and down, and should we be part of social science or stick with agriculture, who sometimes didn't really understand us and occasionally openly didn't want us. And yeah, so I thought that was so for the future. I mean, we have to think of, well, the people there now have to think about and be able to articulate, as you did, Wayne, very well, I think, who we are and who we can become, and how connections to different parts of the university is an advantage, not a weakness, and so forth and so on. I think the institution maintenance is vital, but has to be flexible, because all of a sudden it's all the environment, and whatever one will be able to contribute to, obviously, to climate change, or in any of these, the impact of climate change on individual communities, Aboriginal or agricultural or tourism, and so on, all will be, I would say, I would guess, the flavor of the month for
Mhm.
several years to come, hopefully until it's partially solved or resolved to some degree, and is perhaps replaced by other major international or global issues. So flexibility, I think we've been fleet of foot in the past, um, and will require the same thing again. The future will be with Aboriginal people, which is already taking place in the school, and that can develop on, and maybe collaboration with Northern universities will is another possibility, and so on. So an institution building, I mean, we need to be in, the school needs to always have good friends in Ottawa and in Queen's Park. And you and I, have tried very hard to sustain a relationship with OMAFRA,
Mhm.
to derive some benefits and to make some contributions directly to the major ministry for rural. Maybe that in the future might switch to uh, the ministry that looks after development, land development, municipal affairs.
Mhm.
We tried very hard for a while, perhaps a little bit before you came, Wayne, to have, I remember going to 3 or 4 Roma conferences and so on, and trying to get a handle on the municipal culture. Very much a male culture, very much a politically, if you like, a right wing-ish, not ultras, obviously, but definitely conservative
Sort of
in
values.
a generic sense of the
Yeah.
term,
Yeah.
and a hard nut to crack. And of course, they didn't have it once the I can't remember what it was called now exactly. You know this. They didn't get a block grant from the central government anymore. They
Mm.
had to raise their own funds, which made them much more narrow-minded. But understandably, and they didn't have much discretion. So asking them to support a student to help solve some of the issues that they may be looking at became extremely unlikely.
Mm.
And so I think that's a possibility that the land issue, development issue,
Yeah.
tourism related will continue to be bothersome in southern Ontario.
Yes.
And the issue with so how to perhaps even mediate something between OMAF on the one side and municipal affairs on the other.
I was going to say, I really appreciate you taking us back, though, in time to the issues in the early 1980s when you're referring to the Farmers Women's Network and the challenges of putting that important set of issues on the table as researchers, as practitioners, and so on. And thinking today of some of the work that my colleagues are doing in the program, around COVID as an example.
Yes.
Around climate change and disaster mitigation and indigenous issues and on it goes, farmland preservation and so on, and how these issues evolve over time, and it does speak to that notion of flexibility in terms of moving forward.
And hopefully faculty will be able to go out from the school and update themselves. Getting a PhD 20 years ago is suddenly, in my view, from the people I've met and talked to over the years, it's a good start, but you need a midterm PhD and perhaps even an old age PhD. Keep updating yourself. So I think the school has to do the same sort of thing and reimagine itself. And imagine big. If we start being conservative. Totally, we have to be careful, and we have to have a firm basis and reliable resources and so on. But you've got to get the excitement in there in my view, to think big and go out and make alliances with maybe some unusual partners.
Yes, indeed.
And continue to bring fresh blood. I think the response to the COVID-19 has been remarkable. I've been reading all the different things that students and faculty are doing, and it's great. And SURF has also been doing some things as well. So it's really very, very nice and
dynamic and rich.
Yeah, fast-footed. I mean, that sort of thing could have, well, has laid a lot of places low. You know, poor old Laurentian, for example, and so
Indeed.
on.
Yeah.
Really, uh, yeah, not able to respond quickly enough to perhaps some of the pressures for change,
Mm.
and not having quite enough institutional partners or supporters as well, which is not the case anymore with the school. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
I'm sorry I'm not starting all over and can get in there with the rest of you and
Good.
reimagine the future.
Indeed. Well, maybe with thinking about the future, it's also a point to look back in time. And so it's moving towards my last point of discussion.
Mm.
I know you've been incredibly busy personally since you retired quite a few years ago now in China and elsewhere. So maybe hear a little bit about that and what you would say to some of your former students, just in a generic sense.
Ah, oh, that's a good question. Very good question. Well, I've been busy, but not
In fact, I
not.
just read a paper that you've published with the former student
Oh
who's
yeah,
based
I've
in
got lots of
Scotland and
papers.
elsewhere. So you're quite active still.
Yeah, well, I published a lot of the things that I should have been doing when I was in the school.
Mm.
Um, I got so many things going on, um, and so, you know, bringing in money to support students mainly, that I, I neglected to publish things. So that's a regret that I
Mm.
have personally. It doesn't affect all the other faculty, but and now I've had a very good period of sitting down and thinking about various things that I've probably learned or feel strongly about, and have had the wonderful opportunity of working with some Chinese and European scholars to flesh those into actual publications,
Mm.
and remember, you know, about writing and all those things. And it's been very satisfying and enjoyable, even though the topics are pretty narrow and limited. They do reflect my own journey in part. So the recent one that I sent you on family farms, it was remarkable talking to people in Brazil
Mm.
and then in China, which has suddenly declared what I would think of as peasant holdings, uh, declare them as family farms because they are. They're run by family only. That's all they do is farm and so on. So there's lots of good international connections um, through the China experience, and tourism is another big one. I've got a paper just coming out very shortly on over tourism. Big problem in China. I mean, when you've got 1 billion people and they all start realizing that they can travel and they've got enough resources to go on holiday, which was unthinkable 30 years ago. Chinese people didn't do holidays, but now they do. And so over tourism is a huge problem in rural China.
I can imagine. Yes.
Yeah, it's overwhelming actually. And I'm working with people at Sun Yat-sen University in Guangdong in South China,
Yeah.
who are desperately trying to monitor the over tourism issue in some fabulous sites, but they're being wrecked in one way or another. So it's been a good period for me. One of Don Reed's students, it wasn't called over tourism when she did Lunenburg in Nova Scotia, a PhD student, but some of the learnings that she established have occurred frequently in my China experience. So I'm very happy, very lucky. I've done lots of publishing. And what I would say to future to students is, well, advice needs to be careful if people take it seriously at all. I think to stick to it
Mm.
and trust your, even though we're sort of very science-based and we have lots of statistics and numbers and so forth and so on, and models, and all of which are helpful and useful. But at the end of the day, your inclinations and your intuitive thoughts probably will be the most sustaining thing that you can rely on,
Mm.
and keep them there. Remember what motivated you to get involved in this treacherous sometimes and overworked, overbaked work that you're engaged in, and trust your judgment. If you're from the school, you're going to have a pretty sound basis for doing many things, not the micro details. Can't possibly teach people how to manage everything in the office or in the system, whatever, but to keep the bigger principles in front of you, and that, I hope, will sustain you through what's bound to be difficult times, because by definition, you're doing something that's difficult.
Mm.
Nobody goes on holiday from the School of Rural Environmental Design and Rural Development. It's not a breeze,
Yeah.
obviously. So everybody chooses something that's quite challenging in one way or another. So you've got to meet the challenge with your own feelings about what is right and what is good, and where to, how far to go, and so forth.
Well, with those words of wisdom, Tony, I think it's probably time to
Hardly.
draw our discussion to a close, but it's been fantastic to hear from you. I know your former students will be thrilled at the opportunity to hear from you, what you're doing now, and some of the
Maybe we should
ongoing
do this
things.
again with former students, Wayne.
Well, we'd like to do as many of these as we can, that's for certain. So,
yeah, because they have stories to tell, as you well know. So it would be great to hear a cross section of students one day about what they've been doing since while they were at the school, and then subsequently what work they've been doing afterwards. I think that would be really amazing. We will all be amazed at what these people have achieved.
Absolutely would be, and it is truly amazing, the gift, the opportunity that we have to contribute to people's future and their past. It
makes me proud as hell.
Sure, I'm sure it does. So, with those final words from you, Tony, thank you so much. Wishing you all the best.
You're very welcome. Thank you for the opportunity to remember.
Absolutely a pleasure. All the best to you. Take care.